My daughter-in-law tapped my shoulder with the end of a broom. My son chuckled and told me not to dial 911 because it might make her upset. I stood there like my feet had been nailed to the floor. The bruise faded after a few days, but something inside me split and kept widening. I had sold my bookstore. I had let go of everything to move in with them. And in that moment I saw how small I had become in my own life. So I put a few things in one bag, and I started walking towards something I never thought I would find again. What followed changed more than my address. For 40 years the bookstore had been my center of gravity. I sold my first novel between those shelves. I once balanced Travis on one hip while I shelved paperbacks with my free hand. Those walls had heard my laugh, caught my tears, held my winters, and opened my beginnings. After the mild stroke last October, I understood something had to give. The doctor called it a warning. I imagined a door somewhere beginning to close. On a Thursday, I locked the shop for the last time. A soft spring rain stitched the afternoon together the way it used to when the town felt younger. I did not cry, but my fingers paused on the key longer than they needed to, like my hands wanted one more morning coffee among scuffed floorboards and dog-eared mysteries. That evening, sorting the last boxes in the back room, I found an envelope I did not recognize. It lay under a printed chapter of my unfinished manuscript. The handwriting was shaky and unmistakable. It was Alan's. He had written it a few weeks after his first stroke 7 years ago. He must have slipped it there between the life we built and the life we talked about in whispers. His words were plain and steady. If anything happens to me, do not live for someone else's comfort. You already gave me everything. Promise me you will take what remains of your story and make it yours. I sat on the floor for a long time with the letter sleeping in my lap and the quiet pressed around me. I had told myself I was moving in with Travis and Ellie to rest and simplify. The truth was I could not picture life without the store, without the small daily proof that I was needed. That letter became the last thing I packed. Travis came the next day to help me move. Ellie and their daughter, Isabel, came with him. I watched him carry my old typewriter to the trunk while he chatted about a worker's promotion. Ellie waited by the passenger door, arms folded, already scrolling through her phone. Isabel looked up and asked if I felt sad. I told her no. But her eyes said she understood more than I had admitted to myself. As we pulled away, I looked through the rain-streaked glass at the faded sign above the shop. The letters were peeling. The life inside had already started to dim. Still, I whispered a quiet thank you. Sometimes a chapter does not end with a period. Sometimes it bends into another story altogether. And this time the pen belonged to me. The guest room was in the basement. There was no window, only a small lamp and a framed picture of a pine forest that did not belong to our family. The mattress was stiff. The air carried a thin scent of damp carpet and detergent. I said thank you, but the word felt like it never cleared my throat. Upstairs, Ellie had taped a note to the refrigerator. House guidelines, neat font, bullet points, color-coded. Quiet hours after 9. No TV in shared rooms. No scented products due to allergies. Avoid reheating food with strong smells. Guests should clean up immediately after use. A smiley face at the end. I folded the list and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. Later I found Travis pouring cereal for Isabel. He gave me a sheepish look and said Ellie liked things spelled out. I nodded as if that made sense, but I had not even settled into the couch cushion, and already I felt like a tenant on probation. That afternoon I tried to unpack. There was no dresser downstairs, only two plastic bins labeled seasonal decor and a yoga mat tucked tight against the wall. I left most of my clothes in the suitcase. I lined a few books along the narrow ledge above the bed, the spines making a small skyline to keep me company. That evening I overheard Travis on the phone in the hallway speaking low. He mentioned updating paperwork and making sure things were in place. Then I heard him say to Chuk, Vietnamese for wool. I could not tell who he called, but his voice carried that tone he uses when he is nervous and wants to sound prepared. At dinner, Ali raised the subject. She said it would help to get a few legal details clarified. Nothing big, just a standard power of attorney and a medical directive. She talked about how complicated things got when her aunt passed. Travis added that I should think about drafting a clean new will so there would be no confusion later. He passed me the salad like we were discussing the forecast. I nodded, but inside a quiet weight settled in the middle of my chest. I did not sleep much. The basement was too still. The heater clicked on and off in half our size. Pipes moaned above me like old bones settling. Near dawn I reached for the small box in my bag. Inside was Alan's letter. His shaky script sounded in my head as if he had written it that morning. Do not live for their comfort, live for yours. And yet there I was reading refrigerator rules in a room with no window. It happened the following Tuesday. I set my teacup too close to the edge of the counter while rinsing raspberries for Isabel. The cup flipped. Ceramic hit tile, quick and sharp. It broke into 3 clean pieces. Before I could crouch to sweep it up, something touched my shoulder. Not a hand, the wooden end of a broom. Watch it, Ellie said, her voice light, almost playful. The bristles were turned away. What I felt was the wood, cool and unmistakable. She stood over me like you would scold a pet nosing near the food bowl. I stayed on my knees a beat too long, letting the silence stretch until it settled into the room. When I looked up, Travis leaned in the doorway with a banana in his hand. He smirked and dropped his eyes. He peeled the fruit and walked into the dining room without a word. I swept the broken cup into a dustpan and kept wiping the floor long after it was clean. Later I heard Isabel on the stairs. She stood halfway down, hands tight on the railing, watching. Our eyes met. We said nothing. From behind her, Ellie called up something cheerful about folding laundry and told Isabel to help. Then she added with a smile that did not warm her eyes, Grandma is just tired today. She tripped earlier. Clumsy feet. Isabel hesitated, then turned and went back upstairs, leaving a silence heavier than before. I did not bring up the broom. I did not mention the smirk. I wiped the counters and pretended the cup had been old. The next day, a neighbor dropped off a lemon tart. Ali invited her in and brewed coffee. They laughed in the living room about yoga and middle school admissions. When the neighbor asked how long I was visiting, Ali answered first. Oh, she is helping with the house while Travis works late. She keeps things running down there. Down there. Not retired bookstore owner. Not his mother. Just a quiet helper tucked into a basement. I smiled the way you learn to smile after years of swallowing opinions for the sake of family peace. That night I opened my journal and wrote one line. They are not being cruel. They are being efficient. And I was being forgotten efficiently. A few days later the mail brought a small envelope among coupons and bills. Cream-colored, careful handwriting. Inside was a card with glittery sunflowers. Isabel had written it in pencil, her neatest cursive. Dear Grandma, Thank you for always smelling like cinnamon and reading to me when nobody else had time. I wish I could sit with you more. I read it 3 times and tucked it into my cardigan pocket. My hand rested there a while, warmed by the wool and something steadier beneath it. That note unlocked a place in me I had sealed when I left the shop. Later Travis asked me upstairs. Ellie sat at the dining table with a folder open and a pen placed just so across the top page. The air felt staged, like I had walked into a meeting no one had invited me to decline. Travis gestured to the chair across from them and said "Mama" with a casual tone that did not belong to him. He said the basement room was not ideal for me. No window, no sunlight, and the stairs were not safe long-term. I kept quiet. Ellie smiled the practiced smile she used with strangers. If we move you to the upstairs guest room, you will have a view of the garden and morning light, and it will be easier for Isabel to visit. She paused and slid the folder an inch closer. We were also wondering if you would consider updating the house deed to include our names. It would make things simpler in the long run. If anything happened, there would be less paperwork for Travis. I did not touch the folder. I looked past her to the tulips outside the window. They were starting to droop. April was nearly over. I remembered planting tulips with my husband in front of the bookstore. He always chose yellow, early bloomers that faded fast. I nodded slowly so my face would not tell on me. That room upstairs does sound nicer. Travis let out a breath. Ellie closed the folder and said they would be ready whenever I felt comfortable signing. No pressure. That evening, folding laundry in the basement, I found Isabel's card again in my pocket. Thank you for always smelling like cinnamon. I sat on the storage bench and let the towels cool in my lap. Kindness without conditions is heavier than any rule sheet. Isabel had not asked for anything. She had remembered. I opened the old trunk in the corner and pulled out a box of my husband's papers. There was a draft of his will with my name written clearly beside sole inheritor. A small sticky note in his crooked hand clung to the edge. If anything ever makes you feel small, get up and write the story yourself. I folded the note beside Isabel's card. I started the washer and watched the water rise. The upstairs room might offer sunlight, but the price had already been written in pen, and I had paid enough for rooms that should have been mine without cost. The second time Ellie struck me, it was my hand. It happened in the kitchen after dinner. I reached for the broom to sweep the crackers Isabel had spilled. The handle slipped, and as I adjusted it, Ellie turned, yanked it from me, and the end caught the back of my wrist. I did not cry out. I did not speak. A dull ache pulled and spread quietly up my arm, like a bruise still considering itself. Travis had gone upstairs to answer emails. Ellie did not apologize. She said only that it was dangerous to wave things around, and that I was lucky Isabel had not been standing nearby. Then she left the room as if the air had not changed. I sat at the breakfast nook and studied the pale gray tiles under my shoes. They were cool to the touch, the way Ellie's eyes slid past me most days. A soft shuffle sounded behind the curtain to the hallway. Isabel stepped out with a small first aid box. She looked at my wrist, then placed a cold compress in my palm. Her hands moved carefully, too careful for an 11-year-old. She wrapped the cloth with slow certainty, biting her lower lip the way she does when she is focused. You did not do anything wrong, she whispered. I met her eyes. I know, I said. She put the box away and went upstairs. Her door closed with a gentle click that felt final. I did not sleep. I kept turning the day like a page I could not end. This hand had written bedtime stories. It had held Isabel through fevers. It had folded birthday letters with lavender and pressed leaves. Now it felt like it belonged to someone else. In the corner of the basement, I kept a small chest of old work. I pulled out a draft of a novel I had never finished about a woman who starts over in her 70s. The pages were smudged and tea-stained. I had not looked at it in years. Tonight it called me back. I added a fresh page in pencil. "She did not break," I wrote. She bent, then gathered herself, stood straighter, and chose her next chapter. My wrist still throbbed, but my mind was clear. Clarity does not always arrive with anger. Sometimes it comes colder and cleaner. I slid Isabel's note beside the new page and put them on top in the chest. Then I turned off the light with one finger pressed slow to the switch, as if to say this part ends here. Tomorrow I would begin quiet preparations. No announcements, no drama, only decisions. Because after the second time someone hits you, you stop asking why. You start answering for yourself. The attic had always been off limits. Ellie once told me it was only for storage and too dusty for fragile lungs. That morning, with the house empty for a school trip and a conference, I climbed the stairs anyway. I moved slow, steady, careful not to make the boards complain. The attic door stuck, then gave. Cardboard and mothballs met me with a familiarity that tugged at my ribs. Light filtered through a small round window filmed with cobwebs. Boxes were labeled in Travis's neat hand. Photos, high school, holiday decor, books, college. Near the back, under a broken lamp and a trunk with no latch, I found one marked Mom, old papers. My husband's handwriting greeted me first. A folder labeled Will 2011. Beneath it his pocket notebook, leather peeling at the corners. Inside were inventory notes and lines from poets he loved, then a message to me: if I go first, let her write. Let her live where she wants. Let her start again if that is what she needs. I closed the notebook and felt my hands tremble. Under the folder lay the manuscript I thought I had lost in our last move. My own draft, yellowed pages clipped with a rusted binder. It did not feel like a novel anymore. It felt like a map back to myself. I found the last line I had written. She waited, not because she had to, but because she hoped someone would see her again. I sat on a stool and drew a blank page from the back. I did not think, I wrote. I am not writing fiction anymore. I am writing what is real, about women who are quieted, about women called burdens, about those who vanish inside their own homes. When I finished, my handwriting had tightened and steadied. I slid the page into a padded envelope with the old draft and tucked it into my bag. That night, Ellie noticed the dust in my hair. I told her I had been sorting through some of my husband's boxes. She looked surprised for half a second and went back to stirring her tea. Travis did not look up from his phone. In my room, I opened my laptop and typed the password, the name of our bookstore. I created a folder called The Second Chapter. I scanned the new pages. I copied the deed papers from the house we had sold, just in case. I folded Alan's letter and placed it in the knitstand. No one needed to know what I was building, but something had shifted. I was not waiting for kindness anymore. I was a woman in motion, gathering her pieces in the quietest room and preparing for something louder than grief. Before dawn, I zipped my old suitcase. The house sat in a low hum. I folded my nightgown and last cardigan into the side pouch. Every move felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence I had taken too long to write. I did not leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. In the hallway mirror, my reflection startled me. Not because of age, because I finally recognized the woman looking back. I straightened my collar, slid a hand along the banister, and stepped into the kitchen. Moonlight touched the counter where Ellie's schedule list still hung. Clean fridge, vitamins for mom, locked garage. I peeled the list off, folded it once, and set it in the trash. I opened the back door and heard a soft sound behind me. Isabel stood at the hallway edge in her fuzzy robe, hair mussed, eyes wide and calm. She did not ask a question. She held out a small cardboard bookmark with hand-drawn flowers and glitter glue. "I believe you," it read. I took it and felt my voice catch, so I only nodded. She hugged me hard and quick and went back to her room. I waited one breath and stepped outside. The street was quiet, the sky just beginning to pale. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, dragging my suitcase over the concrete. The air was crisp. I did not feel nervous. I did not feel guilty. I felt clear. On the bus, I sat by the window and pulled out the envelope with my pages. I slipped Isabel's bookmark on top. Her drawing lay beside Alan's letter like compass points set to the same true north. When the bus turned out of the neighborhood, I looked back once, not to grieve, but to mark it done. That house was no longer mine, not the basement, not the attic, not the margin of someone else's story. I reached the old bookstore just before sunrise. The key turned as if no time had passed. Inside smelled like dust and paper and years. My name still ghosted the awning above the door. I stood in the middle of the empty room with my suitcase at my side and listened. Then I opened the back room. The shelves were still sound. A few old labels clung to corners. I touched one. Poetry. This was not a return. It was a beginning. The second chapter, not in fiction, in life. Morning light slipped through the dusty blinds while my hands found work. I was not organizing inventory anymore. I was sorting purpose. The stillness felt expectant rather than lonely. I cleaned the front windows one pane at a time. I cleared the back office. Under yellowed receipts and faded mailing lists, I found the business license with my name across the top. It felt like shaking hands with a version of myself I was not ready to release. By week's end, the shelves were scrubbed and the dust gone. I set up a small card table near the entrance with a coffee pot and a sign that read "Free Coffee." Free ideas. At first, only a couple of older women paused to peek in. They asked if I was reopening. "Not as a store," I said. "Not exactly." Some stayed for coffee. Some smiled and kept moving. I let the pace be slow. On Sunday, I called someone I had not spoken to in over a year. Her name was Lean Park. She had been a customer, and she was also an attorney. After Alan died, she once told me to wait before signing anything. Her voice, when she called back, was warm and direct. She remembered me. We met the next afternoon at the folding table. I poured coffee. She listened while I described what I wanted to build. Not a charity. Not only a reading group, a foundation. A room for women, especially older women, who had been ignored or made to feel invisible. A place to help them write their stories and protect their lives. Legal guidance, estate planning, resources about their rights, support for those living with financial or emotional abuse, a place where your voice did not need to be loud to count. Lean leaned back, crossed her arms, and smiled. She said she would help. No fee, only a promise that I would not quit halfway. That night I wrote a title at the top of my notebook, The Second Chapter Foundation. Under it I wrote, "For every woman who thought her story ended with someone else's decision." The following week a few of those women returned and brought friends. One asked if she could use the old poetry corner for a journaling circle. I cleared the space and found extra chairs in the back. Another wanted to lead a talk about setting boundaries with grown children. I told her the room was hers for the evening. I put a small jar near the coffee sign, not for money, but for stories. Scraps of paper began to appear like small birds landing. I have not spoken to my daughter in 5 years. My son took over my bank account. I miss being called by my first name. I read each note in quiet and filed them under hope. By month's end, one changed the window sign. Not closed, not bookstore. The Second Chapter Foundation. Quiet voices, real power. Beside it I taped a hand-drawn bookmark. I knew the handwriting by heart. I kept the original in my bag and placed a copy on the glass. It still said, "I believe you." This time it was not only for me. A producer called on a Tuesday morning after hearing about us through a community referral. She offered to feature our work if I felt safe sharing my story. I agreed with one condition: no camera on my face. My voice mattered, and the voices in that room mattered more. The segment aired on a quiet Thursday evening. I did not have a television in the shop. By nightfall the phone started to ring. Women from across the state left messages. I did not know I was allowed to say no. My daughter says I complain too much, but maybe she does not want to hear the truth. I thought I was alone. I returned as many calls as I could. Lean offered to help organize a private group for those who preferred a smaller circle. By the weekend we had more than 60 names on a list. Some voices shook on voicemail. Some hands wrote notes in careful print. Some women stood at the door, eyes wet, then left without speaking. Finding the address was enough for a first step. Word traveled farther than I expected. A local paper ran a short piece. A national blog reposted the video. 2 days later our website crashed from the traffic. I did not yet know that back at the house I had left, Ellie paced the living room with the remote in her hand. The screen showed a blurred shot of our front window and the circle of folding chairs. My voice aired without a name, but the story was plain enough to recognize. Travis sat on the edge of the couch and stared. She said I was making them look like villains. He did not answer. He kept watching the frame with the taped bookmark that read, "I believe you." For a moment he pictured Isabel sliding that bookmark into my suitcase in the dark, believing it would go unseen. He stood up quietly and left the room. At the shop I was stacking chairs when Lean walked in holding her phone. She showed me a still from the broadcast. The sign in the window, the coffee table, my back turned, speaking to women seated in a circle. She said this was bigger than a single room now. I looked around at the worn carpet, the old shelves, and the pile of new drafts for our writing circle. Not revenge, not spectacle, stories of survival, clarity, and peace. I nodded. This was not only a second chapter. It was a new book being written line by line. The calls from Travis came around 6 most evenings. Same number. If I did not pick up, 2 rings and silence. Ali never left a message. Travis left one. He said he hoped I was safe. He said Isabel asked about me. He added that maybe we could meet for lunch. I did not call back, not from bitterness, from a wish to protect the clarity I had earned. By then I was helping women every day, in ordinary ways that add up. Angela had taught school for 3 decades and had signed her apartment over to her youngest son. She was sleeping on a friend's couch. Maria cooked and cleaned for a daughter-in-law who called her useless. Then there was Angie. She arrived on a rainy Tuesday with her purse clutched close and only a handful of English words. Lean poured tea and I sat with her near the heater. Between simple words, sketches, and a volunteer translator by phone, her story unfolded. She had flown from Korea 2 years earlier to live with her son. She cooked for him and watched his children and gave up her pension. When she asked to visit her sister in Chicago, he told her no. He said she did not belong here. Now she wanted to leave but had no documents, no income, and no voice anyone seemed to hear. I did not return calls that afternoon. We filled out forms together. With the translator, we contacted a shelter that offered language support and temporary housing. We copied her passport and drafted a letter to the consulate. When we finished, she placed her hand over mine and said the 2 words she knew best. "Thank you." It was enough to carry me for days. That evening, a few women folded brochures for our next workshop, while Lean sorted notebooks. I paused at the front window where a small display of used books sat around a single journal labeled the 2nd chapter. Not for sale, just a reminder that leaving is possible. My phone buzzed. Travis again. I kept the phone in my pocket and watched the room I was already meant to be in. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is presence. Not every story circles back to reconciliation. Some continue into peace. I had learned that peace could be enough. One afternoon, while I reviewed intake forms at the back table, Lean walked over with a small envelope. No return address. My name written in a child's careful hand. Inside was a thin booklet, folded and stapled. On the cover in shaky blue ink it said Chapter 1.5 by Isabel Lindell. My chest tightened before I opened it. It was not quite a story, short paragraphs with small drawings between them. A sun outside a window, a woman on a couch reading. A figure standing alone in a room. Her words weighed more than many hardbacks I had shelved. She wrote about the night she saw me pack my bag. She wanted to speak, but did not know if she was allowed. She wrote that the house felt colder after I left. Her mother said I was being dramatic, and it did not sound true to her. She remembered Ellie raising her voice while I stood silent. She wrote she did not understand why adults acted that way and hoped she would be different. On the last page she drew a bookmark like the one she had slipped into my suitcase. Next to it she wrote, "I still believe you." I sat a long time holding the booklet in both hands. The paper felt soft and worn at the folds, as if she had opened it many times before sending it. It was not just a note. It was a thread back and forward at once, proof that quiet is not empty. Later that week I mailed a small envelope to her. Inside I placed a fresh notebook and a short letter. I told her I had read every word. I told her I was proud of her voice. I told her to keep writing, not to please anyone else, but because her voice matters. Back at my desk I looked at the frame cover of our first small publication now hanging on the wall. Beneath the title, a line in small print read, "Written by those who were told to be quiet." It reminded me why I began, not to be louder, to remind women and girls like Isabel that truth does not wait for permission. A 2nd chapter can start the moment you pick up a pen. The bell over the door chimed in the late afternoon. Sunlight stretched in long, soft lines across the floor. I did not look up right away while I sorted a box of donated paperbacks that smelled like warm attic air. Then I heard her, "Hi, Grandma." I turned and there she was. Isabel stood in the doorway holding something small. She had grown taller in a few months. Her hair was pulled into the same messy braid I used to fix before school. Her eyes held a little doubt, but her feet stayed planted. She walked to me and opened her palm. The bookmark lay there, the same one she had tucked into my suitcase. I held my breath, but she spoke first. I kept it with me and thought one day I might bring it back. She did not explain and did not need to. I knelt and opened my arms. She stepped in, and I held her close. Her shoulders eased against me. There was no speech, no swelling music, only the plain quiet of two people standing still. When we stepped apart, I told her she could stay a while. There was tea in the back and a stack of books waiting to be sorted. She nodded, and we walked toward the office together. As we passed the mission plaque, she brushed a fingertip along its edge, and then she smiled. That smile felt like the first line of something new. I realized the chapter had not ended. The page had turned. If you have ever felt your voice dismissed, if you have kept the peace by swallowing your truth, then you know part of what I carried. My path is only one among many, but perhaps it echoes in you. What might your second chapter look like? When did you last feel heard? If this story stayed with you, share it, because someone out there may find their voice through yours. Thank you for listening.